Hey, John with Mako here. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about a product called Sculpting Medium, and it's SG-501. It's going to give your products or your art projects a whole new dimension, literally, because this is going to give us a three-dimensional raised effect. It's got many uses, for which I'm going to show you a few really simple ones in this video. So the SG-501 Sculpting Medium has a lot of technique uses. So one of the great things is this comes in a screw top 4-ounce container. So it's easy to take a generous amount of this out compared to something, say, like our accent glaze, which is a very fine tipped bottle, hard to get a lot of product out at one time. So I'm going to show you some of the simple things you can do to get very dramatic three-dimensional raised effects. The first thing I'm going to show you is using it with a craft stencil. So you can see that you would base coat your project with something like one of our foundation glazes or stroking coat, and then align your stencil, and then just glide across with either a squeegee or a paintbrush or a sponge, something to fill in your stencil, and then pull it back, and you're going to get a nice three-dimensional raised effect with the sculpting medium. So that's very simple to do, very effective because it's a brilliant white against any other contrasting color. You can also use sculpting medium to paint your design, either directly onto bisque or on top of this happens to be a foundation glaze. And then you can change the color of the sculpting medium, which is a kind of a translucent white, but you can add color to it by painting over the top of it when it's dry with stroke and coat. So I've tinted the flower petals, the stem, and the center using stroke and coat over it. You can also colorize your stencil effect. This was base coated with a taupe colored foundation. My stencil was put into place. I used the sculpting medium directly over the stencil to build up my three dimension. But before I removed the stencil, I came back with another foundation glaze. This happens to be Celery, which is one of the sheer foundations, right over the sculpting medium before I removed it, pulled it away, and then you have a tinted, stenciled sculpting medium design. Now, in addition to using plastic or paper stencils, you can actually use something like we did here with a real actual lace. This was a crochet doily, which is kind of a thick cotton panel. We placed it over the black base coated foundation glaze, applied our sculpting medium, and then pulled the doily away to leave a very textural finish. So you can use real lace doilies and such to give you a three-dimensional effect. Now this is another use of our stencils, but this really illustrates how well the sculpting medium gives you a nice crisp outline. The consistency of it, which you'll see shortly, is very smooth and creamy, so I'm able to get it on nice and smooth. This gives you the look of maybe a porcelain Wedgwood or a cameo effect. You'll notice that it has a nice sheer effect. The blue is starting to peek through ever so slightly. And if you were here and you could run your finger across it, you can almost hear that sound. It sounds like a bisque, porcelain or china bisque feel to it. Now, when you fire it on its own, it does have a bit of a matte type finish. We can alter that by putting glaze over it. When you look at this lace project, you can see that when it's over the glaze and there's no glaze on top of it, it may have a rough or sharp feel to it. I could eliminate that by putting a coat of glaze right over that. So if you look again at my tile that had the flower on it, you can see that the edges are a little softer looking compared to this tile where there was no color putting on top of it. See how much softer the sculpting media becomes when you put a glaze over it. So there's a little bit of a difference. So you can soften those sharp or crisp edges simply by putting a coat of one of our glazes, whether it's a clear or a transparent or sheer or stroke and coat right over it. Now, sculpting medium is a food-safe surface. However, it's not recommended to go on a surface that the food is actually going to sit on, or maybe a plate that you wouldn't want to run your fork or your knife across. So it's more of a decorative accent, maybe around the border or on the outside of a cup, not necessarily because of its surface issues, putting it where the food would actually go, or your mouth or an eating utensil would actually rub across. One of the easiest and most effective ways of applying the sculpting medium is by using a stencil on top of a gloss glaze. So I've poured some of my sculpting medium out onto a palette, and I'm going to pick some up with a rubber squeegee, and I'm simply going to trawl this on, very much the way you might apply spackle to a hole in your wall. And I'm just dragging the smooth edge of the squeegee each time across the surface of my stencil, laying it down nice and smooth. Because this isn't going to move at all in firing, it's important that you lay this on nice and even and smooth. So once I get my entire stencil coated, it's going to start to dry slightly, and I'm looking to see, can I see any of that, in this case a blue glaze, wanting to bleed through. So you can see here it's a little bit light, so I can simply go right over that area and apply another thin layer. So you can apply several thin layers of this product without any worry, as long as it's still somewhat wet or moist. You can use a paintbrush to apply this. So I'm going to switch gears here and show you. You can do the same effect with a paintbrush. It's not quite as smooth. It takes a little bit of extra work to get that product nice and smooth, but you can see it works very easily. I'm going in, filling all the holes in my stencil with a nice, even, smooth application. Smooth that guy down a little bit. You could come back with just a damp paintbrush with a little water to smooth it if there was something that was really an obscure amount of texture. You don't want to add water to this product. You want to always use it full strength. Alright, now I don't want to wait too long before I remove my stencil, because it may give my edges a little bit more of a sharp point to them. So I'm going to just let it start to gel up or firm up slightly, so just a moment or two. Then I'm going to lift my stencil straight up, and I'm going to reveal the crisp edges that were created by this very easy to use stencil. Voila! It's just that easy. Then you would immediately wash off your stencil. Don't let that product dry on there, it's just harder to clean up. Now you can also use stencils. I'm going to turn this a little bit so it's easier for me to reach. You can also use a stencil, put it in place, and then draw around it with a pencil or a pen or a water-soluble marker. And then just come back, remove the stencil, and just come back in and paint. So maybe I don't want to fill the whole bird in. Maybe I want to have just some dabs of color. I could use my sponge. I could use this paintbrush. I could put it into a writing tip bottle and dab it on. Now all of the projects you're seeing on this video and that I've been demonstrating are all low fire techniques. So this product has a firing range of cone 05 or 06. It is not meant for a higher temperature. So for those of you that are mid-range artists, this product does not hold up in dimension at cone 5 or 6. So you can see how easy that is to apply. Now I mentioned earlier, by tinting or coloring the sculpting medium, I've got a piece here that I just finished using a different type of stencil. I've already applied my sculpting medium, but rather than peeling this off and then taking the little brush and detailing, I can at this point take my paintbrush, and I've got, this is one of our sheer glazes. This one is number 227 Celery, and I'm going to add a light coat of this right over the sculpting medium. And you can tint this as soon as it's dry enough to receive a coat of glaze without marring or blending or mushing up together. So nice and smooth coat. So I'm now tinting my sculpting medium. You could use stroke and coat. You could use any of the glazes. The shears work really nice because they still allow a bit of the texture that might be left from the sculpting medium application to show through. So shears are a great way to use for tinting. So I'm just going to quickly zip through the rest of this design. See, I don't have to worry about being neat I can just glob this on just as randomly as I did the sculpting medium. And get to the end here. Now my sculpting medium has already set up a little bit. I was waiting for it to receive this coat of green. So I don't have to wait too long now. I can go ahead and just remove this stencil. You can see I have a three-dimensional design that has already been tinted with another product over the top of it. It's a time-saving technique. Now, see these little sharp edges that I've left from my stencil? It's important for you to knock those off. You can take a palette knife, a cleaning tool, or sometimes even just your finger and knock those off. There's no movement to this product in firing, so if I left them on, they would become quite sharp and not desirable. So it's important to knock those off before firing. So I would let this dry, and I can fire it to shelf cone 0506, and I would have a beautiful three-dimensional raised effect that was very simple to do with something as easy to use as a stencil.